Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 84 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Gavin. That is Fia. Mike is back adventuring. And Fia, how are you doing right now? Has Louisiana been experiencing any of this heat wave?
Yes. It is hot. It's cooled down, but honestly,
Yeah.
it just feels hot all the time. So I don't really notice when it's more hot. It's just always hot, except for like in the winter.
Yeah. But, it was, I think this past Saturday or Sunday, I don't remember, but it was like 95 degrees here in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
It was whatever that same day that New York City was like 104.
Yeah. Too hot.
It's crazy.
It's too hot.
Real hot. It's, yeah. Thanks, climate change. Appreciate you, my dude.
Thanks.
But hopefully on a happier note, I haven't actually listened to it yet, but Mike sent us another adventure update. So we'll let Mike take it away.
Hello, everybody. Mike here again with just another High Peak Summer update. By the time you're listening to this on hopefully Wednesday morning, I will just be getting back from completing the 3 mountains that I did today were in the San Andoni range. The problem is I don't exactly know how to pronounce San Andoni, and there was another mountain that I did that I definitely don't know how to pronounce. It's like Couchigra or something to that effect. But just yesterday I did those two as well as Panther Mountain. And the day before that, I did Giant and Rocky Peak Ridge. So we are now up to 21 mountains for the summer. So I'm almost halfway done. And I'm looking forward to just continuing to bang them out. But things are going well so far. My knees, they are what they are. But honestly, not too bad, all things considered. All the best, everybody. And I'll see you guys next week.
All right, so thank you, Mike, for that kind message and or sorry for what happened to you.
We don't know.
Like I said, I have not heard it yet. So whatever happened, I hope you're living your best life out there, hiking more mountains. A couple housekeeping things before we get into the meat of the episode. Once again, we're trying to plug out all of our various things more often. Fia's been good about reminding me. She reminded me last week.
Oh, yeah.
That was very helpful.
Cool.
But yeah, so filling out all of the forms and things down in the show notes really helps us out. If you have a topic suggestion, or if you are a scientist and would like to come on as a guest, we'd really appreciate it. So we have Google Forms down below in the show notes for you to fill out for us. We also, I'm going to actually mean it this time, actually do some things on the social media for the podcast. We do have a Facebook page and a Twitter account. And also we have a YouTube account where we post every episode. And occasionally, such as this coming weekend, we post bonus videos on there. This weekend I'm going to be putting out a tier list of all of these state fossils. And you mostly get what I think about them just in me talking about them for a last episode and this episode, but I'm going to actually rank them and do it like a sort of tier list sort of thing that'll be coming out on Saturday. So if you want to see where your state fossil falls, if you live in the United States, make sure to check that out.
Cool.
Before we get into some more state fossils, I do have a quick bit of paleontology news, something that I think actually happened like the day before we recorded the last episode, so I probably could have done it if I had seen it last episode, but I didn't actually see it until a couple days ago. But there's been a very controversial fossil that has become not controversial, or at least less controversial. So,
why is it controversial?
So back in 1995, a group of scientists from a museum in Germany exported a fossil from Brazil. And this fossil, which is, by all accounts, an incredible fossil, it is informally called Ubirahara. Is the name of the genus. It is a dinosaur. It is a small theropod, two-legged meat-eating dinosaur.
Okay.
And the reason why it's controversial is because at the time, I think since either sometime in the late 80s or early 90s, but definitely before this, Brazil passed laws saying that fossils cannot be exported out of the country.
Oh.
And that if you publish on Brazilian fossils, you need to have a Brazilian author as well on your paper.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, this fossil left Brazil for legal reasons, I will say allegedly illegally. But this has been, really hot button thing in the news last couple of years because it was formally published. And the reason that I said that the fossil had an informal name is because the paper that was published naming this, because whenever you give something a new name, it's not official until it gets published in a scientific paper, which this did in late 2020, but the paper got withdrawn temporarily by the authors, so they voluntarily did this once people were like, hey, this is definitely, allegedly, illegal that you have this.
Allegedly?
Okay, for legal reasons.
Yeah, I know.
Allegedly.
I just like that you got quiet about it.
Yep. So, obviously, lots of people, including people that we have had on this podcast, Dr. Emma Dunn and Nasaiba Raja. We had them as guests, I think, on episode 33, as well as on our 1-year anniversary about how to become a paleontologist. So they've been very vocal about this. And just this past, week or two, that museum in Germany agreed, following an extremely intense amount of not wanting to do so, they agreed to return the fossil to Brazil, where it belongs. So that's a good sign. And hopefully, in the next year or so, this fossil can be published and formally be given a name.
Yeah,
which is really cool because this seems to be, like I said, by all accounts, a really interesting fossil. It's fairly early. So it's from around 115 million years old. So this would be like early Cretaceous.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really well known for having really well, at least, for fossils as well as you can have for fossils, integument, really, really good integument, which is like outside of the skin covering. So things like hair, or in this case, because it's a dinosaur, proto-feathers.
Whoa.
Particularly on each side of the body around the shoulders, there are two really long, seemingly much stiffer proto-feathers. And that's where it gets its name. Apparently the name Ubirahara means Lord of the Spear in a local language in somewhere in Brazil.
Wow.
So, yeah, well, really cool dinosaur. So hopefully this gets published properly soon.
Well, that's great to hear. Some good news in science.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll link an article down below if you want to read a little bit more about it.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. It was something I was really excited to read about. Some good news in the world for a change.
Yeah, you gotta celebrate the wins.
Exactly. So, now, back to state fossils.
Where are we at?
So, last time, we left off with Michigan, which has the American mastodon as their state fossil, but can you tell me, Fia, what state comes after Michigan alphabetically?
Oh no, you caught me off guard. Minnesota?
I did. You got it.
All right.
So Minnesota has a cool one, and before we recorded last episode, I kind of thought that just quickly going through all the state fossils, that it was a little front loaded with some of the cool ones. But after actually going through and looking up some of these ones before this episode, I was like, no, there's some real hitters in this one too. Minnesota's state fossil is Castoroides, which is a giant beaver.
Oh, I like this.
Mm-hmm. So, and when I say giant, normal beavers are probably bigger than you think, but still, not much bigger than a, small to medium dog, we'll say. Castoroides was much larger, potentially anywhere between 6 and 7 feet long, and getting up to 300 pounds on some of the bigger estimates.
Wow.
So some estimates say that they were a little bit smaller, closer to around 200 pounds, but that's a big beaver.
Yeah, it is.
And so these guys were around up until fairly recently, just until the end of the Pleistocene, so only 11,000-12,000 years ago or so less than 1 million years. So the latter half of the alphabet coming out strong.
I wonder how big their teeth are.
Oh, they're really big.
Yeah, like probably bigger than my head.
Like especially their lower incisors.
Mm-hmm.
The way most rodents work is they have two, their two front incisors on the top and bottom form chisels, and that's how they gnaw through stuff, especially in things like beavers. But especially in beavers, the lower two are really, really long.
Yep.
And in Castoroides, they were most of like the length of like a banana.
Jeez.
Yeah, no, they were real big.
So like about the size of my head.
Yeah, pretty close.
Nice.
Next up, we have Mississippi, which is continuing Alabama's trend of having a cool fossil whale for their state fossil. They have... It was kind of interesting. They sort of, depending on what site you looked at, it just said fossil whale or extinct whale. But then when I actually looked at some websites with like the actual law itself that was passed, it specified that it is a genus called Zygorrhiza, which, similar to Alabama's Basilosaurus, is an extinct group of predatory whales, so not one of the big baleen whales like blue whales and things like that. And not quite as long, but its head is much bigger than Basilosaurus. So this was something that was definitely eating big prey, probably like other whales.
Wow.
Yeah, real big guy. Nasty teeth. Really cool. I love extinct whales. They're so cool. And both in Basilosaurus, it's less noticeable, but in Zygorrhiza, you can still see its little tiny back feet.
Aw, that's cute.
Yeah, it's really cute because they do exist in modern whales as well. Like in their skeleton, they just don't come out of the body. Like they're there, you just can't see them. But in these guys, they probably had two little tiny flippers that kind of just poked out of the body that may have helped in like, it sort of thought they might have helped in like positioning during reproduction or something like that.
Interesting thought.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's one of those things where it's like, okay, we don't really know.
Yeah.
We could, because the whales that we have don't have that. So what could it possibly be using it for?
Right.
Next up, we have Missouri, who, going back to the invertebrate side, we have Delocrinus Missouriensis, which is a type of crinoid. I think this is our first state that had a crinoid. So crinoids are really cool. They named this as their state fossil in 1989. So again, up there with some of the older ones, but not quite some of the 70s that we had last episode. But crinoids are cool because they are effectively upside down starfish on like a stalk, more or less. Yeah. So, and they're still around today, but they are much less common and much less like they have a much less like ecological impact than they used to. I believe that this species was around, I think in the Permian period, so somewhere between a little over 200 million years ago or so. Somewhere between 300, 250 million years ago. And so they basically just filter feed through the water. They're what's called micropredators. So they just sort of pick little floaty things out of the water. And they have these little... Yeah.
That's such a powerful name to call
Oh, I
something.
know. I know. I love it. And so on their arms, because you think of like a starfish, they have arms. Most crinoids had more than the 5 you think of with a starfish, but all along these arms they have little feet that would, once they would catch a thing in the water, they would move it down the little feet to their mouth in the middle, just like a starfish's mouth is in the middle. Only these, instead of crawling around on the bottom like a starfish, they had like an anchor called a holdfast that would hold them to the substrate, the bottom of the ocean, and then they would be on a stalk, and so that they'd be feeding up in the water column instead of on the seafloor itself.
Cool.
So, yeah, like I said, not extinct, even though you'd be forgiven if you had never heard of them before, because they generally today only live in like pretty deep water.
Gotcha.
But really cool. And then Missouri also has a state dinosaur,
Whoa.
which is depending on which paper you're reading, has one genus or a different genus. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, we don't really know exactly which. So the most recent one doesn't mean it's necessarily correct, but most recent paper to come out called it Hypsibema Missouriensis, which is a type of dinosaur it's in the Hadrosaur group.
Okay.
So they, the sort of iguanodon, sort of, big herbivorous dinosaurs, but all the ones without all the fancy things like, not like Triceratops where it's got horns, or not like the sauropods where they're just gigantic. This was probably elephant-ish size, so still pretty big, but not gigantic. But it is really notable just that dinosaurs in general on sort of the eastern half of the country are fairly uncommon. So it's notable that it was found in Missouri. Just because the rocks aren't quite the right age.
Gotcha.
So for a lot of, especially the Cretaceous, so the end of the time when non-bird dinosaurs were around, the middle of the country was covered by an ocean. And so, so that made a lot of nice deposits in the middle of the country. So we have lots of marine reptiles and things like that, all from, northern Canada all the way down to Texas, just in the middle, sort of basically the Great Plains today. And on the west side of that, there was just a lot better environments for depositing rocks instead of on the East Coast where there was mostly erosion happening.
Gotcha.
It's just not the right settings to really get a bunch of fossils, but they do happen.
Yes.
And then especially in the Northeast, we had all those pesky glaciers that even if we did have some rocks that could have dinosaurs, they all just got eroded away by the glaciers.
Nice.
Yeah. So they named that as their state fossil in 2000, or state dinosaur in 2004. So a fairly recent one. Next up, we have Montana, who in 1985 named Maiasaura pibelosarum. I may have mispronounced the species name, but yeah. But Maiasaura, most dinosaurs are just kind of called by their genus name. But yeah, so Maiasaura is very famously, Maiasaura, meaning the mother lizard. It is extremely well known from very large, like a large area of a nesting site. So Maiasaura is so the person who sort of inspired the character of Alan Grant from Jurassic Park. The person who, like in the real world, that inspired that character, his name is Jack Horner. He is a very, accomplished paleontologist, but he's a little sketch, so we don't like to talk about him too much. But he's very well known for working with Maiasaura, and this was some of the first really good evidence that dinosaurs were actually really caring parents, that they actually, spent time and raised their young instead of, what you think of with a lot of lizards or things like snakes that just kind of lay their eggs and leave, even though that's really not the case for a lot of lizards and snakes either.
Yeah.
But yeah, so because they found it with so many of its young in all these nesting sites, they named it the mother lizard. So really cool species of dinosaur. Myosaurus cool. It is another hadrosaur, so a duckbill dinosaur member. So good on you, Montana. Not maybe what I would have chosen, but still a cool one.
To each their own.
Yeah. Next up, we have Nebraska. And Nebraska, it didn't, like, try as little as, like, Kentucky did. Because Kentucky just said brachiopod.
Yeah.
Which, as we talked about last episode, is an entire phylum of life. They didn't quite be that lazy, Nebraska. But they just named the genus Mammoths as their state fossil in 1967. I think that might be one of the oldest ones on the list.
Wow.
So Mammoths is the genus for mammoths.
Yep.
But there are 10 species of mammoths, depending on which paper you're reading. So, which one? Who knows? I think there's at least 2 known from Nebraska, maybe 3. But yeah, I'm not going to complain super hard because mammoths are still cool.
Yep.
Next up, we have one of my favorites, I think, especially from this half. But we have Nevada coming in with Shonisaurus popularis, which I'm going to give them a lot of credit for because they named that in 1977. But the scientific name changed because, as I've talked about a whole lot before, as we get more information, sometimes we realize these 2 species that we thought were different are actually the same. And in that case, whichever one was named first, that one is the name that stays. So they named it whatever it used to be in 1977, but when the name got changed, they changed the official state fossil in 1988. So since then, it has been Shonisaurus popularis. Shonisaurus is really cool. It is a Middle Triassic ichthyosaur, so a group of reptiles that we haven't talked a whole lot about on the podcast, but they are sort of the first truly, well-adapted marine reptiles of the Mesozoic, the ones that look the most like fish. That's what ichthyosaur means, is fish lizard. And they, Shonisaurus is really cool. So Shonisaurus is pretty much considered the biggest of the ichthyosaurs. There's probably there might be 1 or 2 other species that are close. Of the 2 species of Shonisaurus that there is, this one, Shonisaurus popularis, is I think 14 meters long.
Wow. 14 meters?
14 meters. For all my friends out there that use freedom units, that would be in the ballpark of 45 to 50 feet.
Jeez.
And again, that's the smaller of the 2 species.
No.
There is another species that may or may not belong to another genus, again, depending on what paper you're reading. But that one is closer to 20 meters, which again, for my freedom-loving friends, is close to 70 feet.
Jeez.
Which would make it arguably bigger than any mosasaur that ever lived. I think most of the mosasaurs, the ones that are talking about for the biggest ones, top out at 60, like 55, 60. So other than whales, this would be the biggest thing that's really ever swam in the ocean.
And it's a reptile?
And it's a reptile.
Kind of.
Oh no, it's for sure a reptile.
Oh.
Yeah, they're not particularly closely related to dinosaurs or really any other kind of reptile that we have today.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably more closely related to lizards, but where they kind of fit has always kind of been up for debate just because they're really weird. They have a lot of really strange anatomical features that make them hard to fit the other reptiles. So really cool group of reptiles, especially ichthyosaurs. We'll have an episode about them at some point. But, ooh man, Shonisaurus. Good job, Nevada. picking a good one and then
That is
updating
a
your
good one.
taxonomy.
Yeah.
That's what we like to see.
Go Nevada.
Next up, we have New Jersey with Hadrosaurus folkii, which they named in 1991. So Hadrosaurus is the hadrosaur. You know, hadrosaurs are the group of sort of duck-billed dinosaurs. And usually when a brand new, nothing like it's ever been named before, you know, it gets a new genus and species. And if it's super different, then it gets a new family. And usually
that doesn't make sense, really.
Well, I mean, taxonomy. We've had many episodes talking about how taxonomy is all just kind of arbitrary at the end of the day,
right?
But yeah, so if especially this one, Hadrosaurus was named probably back in at least the early 1900s, if not earlier.
Gotcha.
So this was an early dinosaur.
Okay.
And so, especially if it's the first member of its group named, that becomes the name of some of the higher levels of taxonomy too. So, for example, Tyrannosaurus rex is in the family Tyrannosauridae.
Okay.
Because Tyrannosaurus was the first one named, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So, just in order to keep the naming consistent, they just keep traveling it up the tree essentially.
Oh.
So. And it even can kind of get ridiculous. Like, I think the next, 4 quote-unquote levels up from Tyrannosaurus are all some variation of Tyrannosaur or something.
Cool.
There's, Tyrannosauridia, Tyrannosauridae, Tyrannosaurus.
It's
just, all
I see
nested
that pattern
groups.
a lot, too, in, some of the stuff that I'm studying, and that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, Hadrosaurus, like I said, was probably the first named hadrosaur, or at least the one that gave its name to the actual family. So this is sort of the epitomus duck-billed dinosaur. So really cool, especially like I said, being found on the East Coast, pretty uncommon, especially in New Jersey, because New Jersey is small.
Yeah.
So good on you, New Jersey.
Nice job.
Next up, we have New Mexico. They have their state fossil, which is Coelophysis baueri, named in 1981. Coelophysis is a very, very well-known early dinosaur, really, really early. One of, if not the first dinosaur that's truly a dinosaur known, at least especially in North America. So this would be Middle Triassic, somewhere in the ballpark of 225 million years ago or so.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, for all of our listeners out there, if you've seen Jurassic Park 2, I guess, or Jurassic Park 3, they're in that one too. But they are very similar to the Compies, the Compsognathus, from those movies, except maybe a little bigger. But very slender, two-legged theropod dinosaur, very skinny neck, almost like a goose neck, but then with a small carnivorous dinosaur head at the front.
Huh.
And not all that much bigger than like a turkey, probably, size-wise, so not all that big.
Yeah.
But still, really early dinosaurs are really cool because they tell us a lot about, what might... especially for a big group like dinosaurs, the earliest members are always really interesting because it's just interesting to follow the path of how they got to be the way they ended up.
Pretty cool.
Next, we get to
my favorite. It's time.
One of the cool states, New York,
our home state.
Yes, sir. So, going back to the invertebrate side, New York has a Euryptorid as their state fossil, Eurypteris remipes, which they named as a state fossil in 1984. Now, Fia, do you know what a Euryptorid is?
No, but I've been typing in these names on Google so I can have some pictures with me.
Okay.
And they look pretty cool.
Yeah, so Euryptorids are sea scorpions. So they're not... they're called that, but they're not really that closely related to scorpions themselves. They're in the same group as, scorpions and spiders and like horseshoe crabs as well. So they're not arachnids, but they're arachnid adjacent.
Mm-hmm.
But they're really cool. Some of them could get up to, 3 meters or so, give or take 10 feet. And especially during the Silurian period and probably early Devonian, they were some of the top predators in the ocean. And some of them, even up to like the Carboniferous period, would be known to come up and hunt stuff on the shore.
Wow.
So New York is very well known for their Euryptorids, particularly over around the Buffalo area. There's a lot of really cool Silurian age rocks from that area. And so Euryptoris is itself as a genus. It's not particularly big. It's, maybe about the size of your hand, maybe a little bigger.
Nice.
But
yeah.
So,
they kind of look like, sorry, they kind of look like something you would see like in the Atlantis, the Lost Empire Disney movie. Is what I'm picturing.
Yeah, they do.
But probably a lot smaller.
Yeah. But like I said, some of them, could fit in your hand. Some of them could be, human sized. So,
true.
Yeah, but this one, like I said, Euryptoris, probably where the family Euryptoridae comes from. More taxonomy for you. But yeah, good on you, New York, picking invertebrates.
Yeah, go inverts.
Not that there's too much of a choice. It'd pretty much either be a Euryptorid or a mammoth or mastodon. That's pretty much all New York's got for vertebrates.
They got creative, I guess.
Yeah. Next, we have North Carolina. And this one's actually interesting for a reason that's a little bit of nonsense. Potentially. I thought it was going to be nonsense, but actually turned out maybe not. So, their state fossil is Ototus megalodon. Megalodon, the giant shark.
Yeah.
This is what Georgia should have done, but they just picked shark teeth instead. So they named that as their state fossil in 2013, which I was like, what year did that Shark Week fake documentary come out?
Oh, no.
And it was 2013. It was the same year.
Cool.
However, Shark Week, it actually, I think, was a coincidence.
Wow.
Because Shark Week is in usually somewhere between late July and mid-August.
It's Shark Week right now, I'm pretty sure.
Is it?
I think so. Maybe I'm wrong.
Interesting. I thought it was a little later, but it might be Shark Week.
It starts July 24th?
Okay, yeah, so it's Shark Week.
Woohoo!
Well, I know what we're talking about next week. We already did an episode on sharks, but sharks have lots of relatives, so we can talk about them maybe.
Cool.
Yeah, because next week would be a Mike episode, so we'll see if Mike's gonna be back.
Yeah,
but we'll see. But yeah, so Shark Week is roughly this time of year, but they named that as their state fossil. I think I looked up the legislation, and it was in March.
Okay.
So they named it same year, but a couple months before Shark Week. So unless they had some inside knowledge of Shark Week, complete coincidence. So Megalodon, you've probably heard of it. Giant shark, big shark, 50 or so feet long. It's been bounced around what genus it's in, but people just call it sort of by the species name, Megalodon, which is really funny because there is actually a genus called Megalodon, which is some kind of bivalve.
That's funny.
Yep. And there's been several science writers who don't actually know science who have confused the two. I think there was a paper published about the bivalve, and some poor science writer was just like, "Oh, I'm writing about this," and man, they were very confused. Next up, we have North Dakota, whose fossil is Territo Wood.
Oh.
which is interesting. And I actually had to have this explained to me in the past. So one of my old roommates was, she did her undergrad in college in North Dakota. And so she was a paleontologist too. We went to the same grad program. And she was bummed that was North Dakota state fossil because she thought it was lame. But I actually think it's kind of neat. So they named that as their state fossil in 1967. So another really old one.
Mm-hmm.
Territo wood is wood that has boreholes in it from a type of worm, where the genus is Territo.
Oh.
Which is interesting. I'm sorry. They're actually not worms. I was wrong. They're called naval shipworms, and I just took that at face value. They're actually some kind of bivalve. Sure.
Whoa.
Yeah, so they I think they use their shell to sort of bore into the wood, things like driftwood. So Territo wood is, and Territo, the genus, is still around today. You can still go out and find those clams, but they, I guess, in the past, when, like I said earlier, when the center of North America was covered in ocean during the Cretaceous, just like you can find driftwood in the oceans today, wood would drift out into the ocean back then too. And I guess these particular bivalves really like to bore through wood with their shells. They work their shells back and forth and drill into the wood to give themselves a substrate. And for whatever reason, they just really like wood. So I think that's actually really neat.
It is.
And they just basically float around on the wood so that they don't have to sit in the same spot. They can float around with the wood. A little bit of a bummer if the wood washes up, but
yeah.
Details. So good on you, North Dakota. It's a really unique one, I think. And named way back in 1967. Good on you.
Yeah. That's pretty old to be having those big thoughts.
Right. And like I said, I think 1967 is at least tied for the oldest state fossils.
Yeah, I think so too.
So good for you, North Dakota. Those words probably will not leave my lips again. Sorry, I did grad school in South Dakota. We're a little biased.
Yeah.
We have next Ohio with they have a state fossil, and actually they specified more. They have a state invertebrate fossil, and then a state fish fossil.
Wow.
Yeah, so their state invertebrate fossil is Isotelus Maximus, which is a type of trilobite. Trilobites, we've talked about. We've previously described as undersea Roombas.
Yes.
They are a type of arthropod. So they are very loosely related to things like insects. Arthropods being anything with a hard exoskeleton, like a crab, insects, spiders, things like that. So they are arthropods, but not very closely related to almost anything that we have alive today. But Isotelus was one of the biggest isopods. They were around in the late Ordovician period. And Isotelus Maximus, I think, is up there with the largest species of trilobite. It's hard to find, good measurements, but another species of Isotelus was over 2 feet in length.
Wow.
Which for trilobites is enormous. And so Isotelus Maximus was not quite that big, but probably easily over 1.5 feet probably. So an actual undersea Roomba. And Ohio also, like I said, have a state fish fossil, and they chose Dunkleosteus. What is the species name? There are a couple species. Dunkleosteus Torelli, and they just named that in I'm very sleepy today. They just named this as their state fossil last year, 2021.
Wow.
Dunkleosteus is really cool. I
Love
think
the name.
technically these have been found in New York as well. So I think I've mentioned just sort of offhandedly Dunkleosteus a handful of times before when we've talked about fish evolution. So Dunkleosteus is a placoderm, sort of colloquially known as the armored fish. Sort of the front third of their body, mostly around the head, is pretty much the only place where they had actual bone. The rest of their body was much like a shark and probably cartilage.
Wow.
But the front half is very solid bone. And Dunkleosteus is, imagine sort of a great white shark, maybe a little bigger even.
Whoa.
But its entire head covered in bony armor.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. And what makes them even more scary is a lot of placoderms did not have teeth. Instead, they just used bone. They had jaws, so they just had sharpened jaws that they would use basically as scissors to just cut right through stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, yeah, these guys were really hardcore. This is likely where bony fish evolved from, this group of called placoderms. So bony fish being most of the fish you're thinking of, and then also including things like tetrapods, all the land vertebrates. So really interesting. I like placoderms. They're really, really cool. And especially Dunkleosteus, which was probably the biggest.
Yeah.
So good on you, Ohio, picking some real winners here. Next up, we have Oklahoma, who kind of cheats. So Oklahoma, in 2000, named their state fossil a dinosaur called Sorophagonax Maximus. So Sorophagonax means lizard eater, something to that effect. Phage, P-H-A-G, usually means something to do with eating. And then Soro, meaning lizard. So it's a big theropod dinosaur from the late Jurassic period. And by big, not quite T-Rex big, but for the late Jurassic, there wasn't anything T-Rex sized. So this was probably one of the bigger things running around. And somewhere in the ballpark of 40-ish feet long. And then give or take somewhere between 3 and 4 tons.
Okay.
So big animal.
Yeah.
For reference, the big rhinos weigh about 4 tons. But this would be something size-wise be about the size of an elephant because it's, theropod dinosaur up on 2 legs. So cool guy. But like I said, Oklahoma cheats.
Why?
And so even though they have a dinosaur as their state fossil, in 2006 they also named a state dinosaur.
That is cheating.
Yeah. So in 2006 they named Acrocanthosaurus Etokensis as their state dinosaur, which is a little bit later on, but still, vaguely related to Sorophagonax. And so this is from like Middle Cretaceous or so. And Acrocanthosaurus is a decent amount chunkier. It's probably about the same size and weight, but just its body was proportioned a bit differently. So this is sort of the T-Rex before T-Rex almost, if that makes sense.
So
this was, yeah.
Is this dinosaur cooler than the Sorophagonax?
I think so, personally, just because Acrocanthosaurus has really tall neural spines, which are the sort of, I guess, spine that comes up off of the vertebrae along the back. So a lot of people have in the past reconstructed it with like a small sail. That's probably not true. It probably just had muscle or potentially fat stores up there, which is why it has those taller spines. Which is why I say that it would have looked a little like chunkier than Sorophagonax. However, the name Sorophagonax is also really cool.
Yeah.
So,
but just trying to get a feel why they would cheat and add in another dinosaur, I guess.
I really don't know.
Right.
I guess Oklahoma is just jealous of the surrounding states stealing its paleontology thunder.
Yeah. Anyway.
So moving on, we have Oregon, who also cheats a little bit. So they only have one, so they don't cheat in the same way that Oklahoma did. But they named a genus, so they don't have a species for it, just the genus. But that genus is still alive.
Oh.
So they named Meta-Sequoia as their state fossil in 2005. And so Meta-Sequoia is one of the three species of true redwood trees. So we still have one species of them today. There's Meta-Sequoia Glyptostroboides. Say that 5 times. But it's actually quite unique, at least the single living species of Meta-Sequoia that we have today. It's somewhat unique in that it's a conifer, a redwood, a pine sort of tree that is deciduous. It's a pine tree that drops its needles in the winter. Yeah, being from the Northeast, that's not really a thing that exists.
Yeah. So,
yeah, it is interesting. So, they are very large trees, like you would think of with, the West Coast redwoods. So they sort of are in a group with the ones that you think of as the true redwoods, which are in completely separate genera, so not super closely related, but in terms of, I don't understand plants. As closely related as plants can be in different genera. But yeah, so I think they're even still native to Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. But I guess they found fossils of it in Oregon, and we're like, hey, we really like this tree, so we're going to make it our state fossil too. So good on you, Oregon. Next up, we have Pennsylvania, where I now live.
Hey.
And I have a bone to pick.
Oh. A bone.
So that was not a pun.
Oh.
That was completely unintentional. I wish that had been on purpose. So earlier I mentioned that Nevada, and I believe there was another state that actually did it last episode as well, where they changed the taxonomy. Once the scientific name had been changed, they wanted to keep the same thing as their fossil, so they passed another law updating the name.
Okay.
Pennsylvania did not do that. So there's an extremely famous genus of trilobites. Same group with that Isotelus one that was really big from Ohio. There's a very famous genus called Phacops. Very, very diverse, very well known among other places, Pennsylvania. So one of the most well-known species from that genus is Phacops rana, and that was what was named as Pennsylvania's state fossil in 1988. However, a group of authors decided that this particular species doesn't seem like it fits. It's a little different, but it's different enough from the other species in Phacops that they thought it deserves its own genus. So they gave it a new genus called Eldridgeops, which they named as from Eldridge horrors sort of things. It's very well known for having really big funky eyes, which is apparently a thing in Eldridge books. I don't know. So the official name is Eldridgeops rana. However, the Pennsylvania state legislature has not changed it yet.
When did
so technically? Oh, go ahead.
When did the taxonomy change?
That's an excellent question. I don't particularly know. Let me look.
But it's been a minute.
Yeah, it wasn't even in the last year or two, I don't think.
Got it. Okay.
So they've definitely had time.
Right.
Yeah, so I looked and I don't know when when it was changed, but I don't believe it's been in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So, Pennsylvania State Legislature. I know you've had a lot of other things going on with a whole pandemic, but this could literally take 2 seconds in a state legislature. So, hey, get on it.
Yeah.
So, after Pennsylvania, we have South Carolina, who in 2014, so they took a while. And you would think, I think all of the other coastal states named something coastal. Yeah, like North Carolina named Megalodon. As we'll see in a little bit, Virginia named something aquatic. So like its neighbors and some of its nearby states named something aquatic. South Carolina said no.
South Carolina said, I'm going to be different.
Yep, they decided, I'm going to be basic. And in 2014, named Mammoths columbi, the Columbian mammoth. Yeah. Okay. Which, like, yeah, Columbian mammoths are cool. They're really big.
Yeah.
But at least, like, 3 or 4 other states have mammoths as their state fossil or state, as we'll talk about in a little bit. One state has them as their terrestrial fossil because they differentiated. Mm-hmm. And in that case, I think that's fine because they picked something else that was cool. But anyway, Columbian mammoths, really cool. Especially because when people think of mammoths, they always think of the woolly mammoth, which Columbian mammoths, despite being closely related to, we don't really have any evidence that they were super woolly. They probably just looked like a real big Indian elephant.
Okay.
Yeah, because mammoths are more closely related to the Indian elephants than to the African elephants.
Wow.
Yeah, so they probably just looked like a giant, especially with Columbian mammoths, a much bigger Columbian Indian elephant.
Cool.
So I guess it's fine, South Carolina. You're doing your best out here.
Are they though?
Next. No comment. Next, we have South Dakota, who picks an old one but a good one. They picked Triceratops Horridus, the very, quintessential. I think there's 2 species of Triceratops. This is the more well-known one. Yeah, they named that as their state fossil in 1988. And funnily enough, we actually, where I did my grad school in South Dakota, we have the actual specimen because they specified not only a species, but an actual specimen when they passed the law. And that specimen is on display at the museum that I worked at in South Dakota. So that's pretty cool.
So you've seen it?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
I've dusted it off.
Oh, you touched it.
Yes.
Nice.
Which, like, is not really supposed to happen, but it's in, like, a middle sort of thing, so people couldn't really get to it. But I worked there, so I could.
Perks.
Yeah. So, Triceratops, if you don't know what it is, go touch grass, as the kids say. One of the most famous dinosaurs, right up there with T-Rex. Do you think I need to describe Triceratops?
No, I knew what it was, and I know very little about dinosaurs, so.
Cool beans. So, moving on, we have something right up Fia's alley in Tennessee.
Oh.
We have Pterotrigonia, or I guess, nope, that's a silent P. Pterotrigonia Thoracica, which they named as their state fossil in 1998, which is a bivalve.
Wait, can you say it again?
Pterotrigonia.
Got it.
But with a P at the beginning.
Oh, this is pretty.
They're very pretty.
Yeah.
They are. Sophia, actually, tell me about this because I am like it's. The internet tells me it's a bivalve. Other than that, I don't know.
Yeah, it looks kind of like it's like it has ribs almost, and It almost looks spiral, but it's not because it's obviously bivalve, so it has two shells.
Right.
But yeah, it looks pretty cool.
Yeah, and there's nothing particularly closely related alive today, but there is a larger group that is, I guess, the order of Trigoniida that's still alive today, still kicking. So it's got some relatives, but not anything particularly close. And the ones that I looked up that are still alive today don't even particularly look like it. So, bivalve taxonomy, man.
Taxonomy,
But,
man.
Yeah. Oh, you right. But yeah, so this was a marine bivalve in the late Jurassic through the Cretaceous, which is very strange that it's in Tennessee.
Yeah.
I don't particularly think I don't think that the Western Interior Seaway got that far east. That section of North America that was covered in ocean in the Cretaceous, I don't think it got that east, but apparently it did.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, literally 2 years after Tennessee named that as their state fossil, one of the best fossil sites in North America, arguably the world, was discovered in Tennessee.
Whoa.
in 2000. Yeah. That'd be the Gray Fossil Site, which is associated with East Tennessee State University. So really cool fossil site, but we can go into that later in a later episode.
Cool.
Next up, we have another sort of cheater. Texas. So, Texas, you're really doing a lot of things right now. So I have no problems calling you a cheater.
Yeah.
So they don't have a state fossil.
Okay.
But they do have a state dinosaur.
All right.
So that's one way in which they cheat. They also cheated in which they named a dinosaur which we only have 4 bones from. But it is a really cool one who its name is probably my favorite name of a dinosaur. So I guess I'll have to congratulate Texas a little bit. So in 2009, they named Soro Poseidon prolestes as their state fossil. Soro Poseidon, which Poseidon, famously the Greek god of the ocean, is also the god of earthquakes. So what they meant for this to mean is lizard earthquake god. Which is pretty cool, especially because this is right up there with if you know, again, 4 bones. There's only so much you can say, but if it compares well to what it's probably related to, this was right up there with one of the biggest sauropods ever. So sauropods being the long neck, long tail dinosaurs, your Brontosaurus type of dinosaurs. So we have 4 neck vertebrae from Sauroposeidon, and they are gigantic. Each one, I guess sort of the middle one is about as tall as a person.
Wow.
So a neck vertebra, give or take a Fia size. It's a little smaller than 6 feet, so not quite a Gavin, but definitely a Fia.
You're taller than 6 feet?
Yeah.
Huh.
Only a little.
Okay. Good to know.
But depending on which paper you're reading, because again, if you only have 4 bones, the estimates for how big this thing is vary wildly. But it is a member of the group that held its head much higher off the ground compared to something like a Diplodocus, which held their head more or less level with their back. But this thing could have its head something close to 50 feet off the ground, so it could look into a 5-story building.
How did they know this much with just 4 bones?
So with sauropods, their neck bones are very distinctive.
So you can make assumptions.
Right. If it had just been like a couple toes,
yeah,
you'd be like, oh, this is a big sauropod. But No, we even have, we know that it's even like one of the bigger groups, obviously. And so that's something you can just sort of tell where if it's like, well, all of its relatives do this thing, so it would be weird if this one didn't.
Yeah.
So a really good example of something that I actually heard about that was we've never actually found hair on a saber-toothed cat. But it would be real weird if they just didn't have hair, so you just assume that it does.
Okay.
So, similar thing. So, you cheat in several ways, Texas, but fine, you picked a cool one. Next up, we have Utah, who also cheats the same way that Oklahoma does. However, I know loosely through the podcast, somebody who helped name the state dinosaur, so I guess we'll let it slide.
Nice.
So, Utah, in 1988, named Allosaurus Fragilis as their state fossil. And so, Allosaurus, again, very quintessential theropod dinosaur. It was around in the later Jurassic and was one of the bigger theropods around. It was... I hate when I hear people say this, but I guess I'm going to say it as well. It was sort of the T-Rex of its time. It was probably the biggest predator, especially like in North America. I don't know exactly what the rest of the world was doing, but in North America, the biggest theropod dinosaur around, give or take 30 feet. So, big animal.
Do you know why?
And was hunting things. Oh, go ahead.
Do you know why, like, the species name was Fragilis? Like, it sounds like fragile to me. I'm like, that seems misleading.
Right. So, it is relatively slender for a theropod its size.
Okay.
So it is hypothesized that it was very good at running and chasing down its prey. Plus some other theropod dinosaurs in which, this was named before T-Rex was known.
Okay.
So take this with a grain of salt. But so T-Rex, its skull is big and beefy to be able to take bite forces and just crush through anything that it can chew on. Whereas Allosaurus and its relatives, their skulls are not built for that. If it, if it took the stress that like a T-Rex bite could produce, it would snap, it would break itself. So they probably just use their head in a different way when hunting, like you bit in different ways essentially. And we're probably much more pursuit predators than something like a T-Rex, which might have been like an ambush predator or something.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So think of sort of this is a cheetah compared to like a lion that is a T-Rex in this analogy. Yeah. So yeah, that's their state fossil. However, in 2018, Utah raptor was named as their state dinosaur, which is pretty cool that they actually named Utah raptor as Utah's state dinosaur. Who would have thought?
Nice.
So Utah raptor is more or less the size of what the velociraptors in Jurassic Park are. Maybe a little bigger. So it is one of the largest members of the family Dromaeosauridae, which is the quote-unquote raptor family. But it could be somewhere in the ballpark of 17 feet long. So not quite as big as something like Allosaurus, but could be anywhere from, mid 600s of pounds. So this was a big animal. But it was, compared to other, members of this family, quite heavily built. So not quite as, chase after you and get you like a velociraptor from Jurassic Park as you would think, but probably much more an ambush predator like I was just talking about.
Cool.
Yeah, and we actually had one of the people who really pushed for this to be named as their state fossil because his kid was interested in it. I interviewed him on an episode of the podcast, and if I was a better host, I would know what episode that is. But yeah, when all the construction stuff at the the fossil trackway in Utah, the construction that damaged the trackways, when we talked about that story, we had somebody on who, lives in Utah and is a very well-connected person politically in Utah. And so his son likes dinosaurs, and he, helped his son get this named as the state dinosaur.
Cool.
Yeah. Getting toward the end of the list, we have Vermont, who does something real cool. Vermont has a state marine fossil and a state terrestrial fossil. So their state marine fossil is Delphinapteris Lucas, which is the beluga whale.
Aww.
Back during the Ice Age, and even a little more recently than that, the St. Lawrence Seaway, which connects the Great Lakes out to the ocean, was much more flooded and marine than it is today. And so beluga whales made it much farther up the river. You can still find them in the mouth of the river way up in Canada, but they don't really get all the way into the river, like into the Great Lakes. But back then, they did. And so they left fossils in places like Vermont.
Wow.
Yeah. So they named that as their state fossil in 1993, but then they redesignated it as their state marine fossil because in 2014 they named the woolly mammoth as their state terrestrial fossil.
Oh. All right.
Right, and it's like, okay, you did something else kind of neat.
Yeah.
Vermont, so we'll give you a pass.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Virginia, which in 1993 named Chesapeake Jeffersonius as their state fossil. And Fia, does pectin ring a bell?
Yes, but I don't know at the moment. It's something with biochemistry.
Oh. Not where I was going, but probably. So pectin is a common suffix or something associated with scallops.
Oh. I don't do scallops.
Yes. Oh. Well, they're bivalves. I don't know. I just thought maybe. I know they're, bivalves are a very diverse group of animals.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, so Chesapectin is a relatively recent, just in the latest Miocene to through the Pliocene a little bit. So only, 5 to 4-ish million years ago, species of scallop that was found in Virginia.
Cool.
Cool beans. So it's named after the Chesapeake Bay, and Jeffersonius, named after, Thomas Jefferson, because he was from Virginia, I guess. Sure.
Oh, lovely.
Oh, Tommy J.
Tommy J. I like that.
All right, rounding out, we're in the last letter of our state alphabet here. We have Washington State, which in 1998 also named the Columbian mammoth as their state fossil. We've already talked about the Columbian mammoth.
Yep.
But good on you, Washington. It's a good one. There's lots of cool fossils. Come on, Washington. Including, I don't know that this has been found in Washington, but it's a cooler fossil. West Virginia in 2008 named Megalonix Jefferson Eye, which also is named after Thomas Jefferson.
Why?
But I think he actually discovered this one, so there's actually a reason for it.
Okay.
Or at least was like a big part of like finding it. Okay. I think. But yeah, Megalonix is a genus of ground sloth.
Pretty cool.
Very cool. Not one of the giant ones. This species was smallish rhino-sized, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
10 feet long, about 2,000 pounds. So much more cow-sized, I guess. But if a cow could stand up on its hind legs and had big old claws to get you.
Like a bear, maybe?
Like a big old bear, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what if bear but cow?
Got it.
Yep. So that's West Virginia. Good job, West Virginia.
Nice one.
second to last, we have Wisconsin. And we're swinging back to the inverts because they named E's at the end of words in Latin or Greek always confuse me because it's like, how do I pronounce that? Anyway, Calamine celebra. I don't know. It's a trilobite. It is somewhat closely related to that one from Pennsylvania, Eldrodops. So in the same ballpark, but it is from the Silurian period. So
Cool.
Not super notable. Smallish trilobite, but good for you, Wisconsin, for having a little homegrown pride. Not a well-known one. So it took... Somebody really wanted that as well. And was... If it's not something fancy or cool, like a mammoth, this must have just been like one legislator's pet project that they must have just been so annoying about that everybody else was like, fine.
Yeah.
Sure. So good for you, that guy or girl. Lastly, we have Wyoming. And they also have two fossils. In 1987, they named the fish genus Knightia as their state fossil. So it is a small fish that is in the same sort of group as herring and sardines. So it would be a very familiar looking fish. But they are very well known from Wyoming from being exceptionally well preserved.
Yeah.
You can see basically every single bone in their body, and it is that finding them in that form with that quality of preservation from this particular, I think it's the Green River group, is the name of the rock formation that it's founded. Finding them in that with that whole body right there is very common in that particular formation. So good on you, Wyoming. But they also have a state dinosaur, which they didn't specify the species, but it is Triceratops, which they named in 1994, almost certainly in response to Jurassic Park. Because the movie came out in 1993.
Yeah. Checks out.
And so that concludes our list of state fossils.
We got through it.
We did. If you live in a state, let me know your thoughts on your state fossil, or if you live in one of those 4 states that do not. Looking at you, Hawaii, Iowa, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. Maybe pester your legislators about it. Because the more fossils, the barrier.
Nice.
And so, like I said, I will be doing a tier list video of all of these state fossils coming out this Saturday. So keep an eye out for that. But that's my time done. Fia, what do you have for us for Swamp Corner this week?
Oh, yeah. So, I almost forgot. Last week, I was processing some of my community samples, and I came across this fish, and I was like, I don't know what the heck this fish is. It looked like a flounder at first, and then it kind of looked like it had like the mouth of a trout. And then I was confused. So I go around at LumCon, like the marine center that I'm working at, and I'm asking all these professors, I'm like, do you know what this is? Do you know what this is? Nobody knows what it is. I go around and ask like some of the local people that work there, like the vessel people and like the boat people. I'm like, do you know what this is? They're like, no, let me ask my guide. Nobody knows what it is. And so I tweet it. I posted on Twitter because I'm like, somebody help me. I don't know what this is. I ended up figuring it out myself. So I found out that this is the stretch jaw blenny, Chasmodis longimaxilla. It is a type of comb-toothed blenny, which, as their name would suggest, comb-toothed blennies are noted for their comb-like teeth lining the inside of their jaw, which I was able to see once I took a look inside of its mouth. These fish don't really have that much info about what they eat, and I was trying to figure that out for my own personal project reasons because I'm looking at functional feeding groups, which is
Yeah.
categorizing organisms by how they feed instead of using taxonomy, because as we've mentioned multiple times in this episode, taxonomy, what are you doing? But yeah, generally they are detritivores, but they also can eat scales of other fishes, algae, small crustaceans, and coral polyps. One scientific article that I saw, quote, said these stomachless fishes. And I was like, what? They don't have stomachs? How is this possible? And I'm like going on this goose chase trying to figure out like why they don't have stomachs, but I haven't been able to see any other place that talks about this. So I take that with a large grain of salt that might have been something lost in translation, maybe. But yeah,
that's very strange.
Yeah, and it was like
I
in a scientific.
I wouldn't put it past fish. Interesting.
Yeah,
I wouldn't put it past fish to just get weird like that, but just not having a stomach is a little strange. Like, does it just go straight from like esophagus to intestines? That doesn't seem very successful for life.
Listeners, take that with a grain of salt. Do your own research. See if you can find anything, and if you do, let me know because I am at a loss here. But
interesting.
Yeah, everyone was super interested to find out what this was. I guess no one's really ever seen this type of blenny around LumCon where I work, and some people were pretty excited that I had found that.
Awesome. No, it's always cool when you have little fun mysteries at work, or especially in research. So, cool. Yep. Yeah, interesting. Now I'm very curious. I might have to do a little deep dive of my own on this little guy.
Cool. So that's all I have.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Fia.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, Fia, and thank you, listeners, for listening. And we will be back next week, potentially with a Mike episode, or potentially with Shark Week. We'll see what's going on. So, I have been Gavin, that has been Fia, and this has been episode 84 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive, and we will see you all next week. This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Gavin Davidson and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Fenella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.